Taking the rules.
Good job, man. You were working back there.
Yeah. Okay, we're good. We'll call the meeting to order, everybody. We're still working on House Bill 156, proof of voter residency registration qualifications. We had, I believe we'd finished all the testimony in the room, but I'm not sure. There may have been, had you testified before, sir? Is the first time on? Please come up. I'm sorry. Yeah, I guess that's right. And other folks, just get in line. Welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for working so hard. You guys, I've observed your process here, and you're killing it, so good work. Thank you. I'm
We're killing
speaking.
ourselves. Mr.
Yeah, no kidding.
Thank you very much.
I'm speaking in support of this bill. It's just a common sense bill about residency, making sure people are actually residents of the state when they vote. Setting a time period of 30 days is a reasonable time period. I have a unique perspective on this. For 12 years, my family and I were full-time RVers and traveled the country. And there's a large portion of people that travel and live that way, and residency becomes a real issue. So I understand the perspective of being able to go to a state and potentially register rapidly and vote immediately, and that can create skews in the population. So I just think this is a really common sense way of handling it, making a 30-day period. I stand for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kemp. Appreciate it. Anybody for Mr. Kemp? Thank you. Ms. Carpio.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Marissa Carpio. I work for the Equality State Policy Center. I think we're all in agreement that only qualified electors who are U.S. citizens and residents of our state should be able to vote in our elections. But we do echo the concern for real Wyoming residents who are qualified to vote who will be disenfranchised by this bill as it currently stands. This includes the many rural voters with P.O. boxes, those in assisted living or in shelters of any kind, women, kin, or the elderly whose names do not appear on utility bills, those on the reservation, those in transient housing, and other unintended victims. Sorry. I do think that the Wyoming Department of Transportation has a good process for this, for their driver's license, to prove residency to get a Wyoming driver's license, which uses 2 pieces of mail with physical address or a Wyoming ID. Also, adding in a residency affidavit into statute might be a way that those folks that I mentioned before would be able to prove their residency without having that mail, the proof of residency through mail. Keeping at least the residency affidavit in statute allows for flexibility for the Secretary of State to determine other types of documentation while making sure as the executive office moves through each year in each election, the baseline that those folks are covered through that affidavit remains. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Any questions? Thank you very much. Next, boss lady.
Hello, my name is Jenny DeSaro, and on this bill, I'm speaking from my personal experience. I recognize that I appreciate that all of us probably in this room are property owners. However, as I was listening to the discussion on this bill, it occurred to me that I have not always been a property owner in Wyoming, and I moved back when I was finishing up my graduate degree, and I moved back. And so what I was thinking about, that I think there's a gap where we're missing those 30 to 40-year-olds who might be not anchored in a residence, and whether they're, so I moved back. And what I was hearing from the bill was that I would be forced to go back to the place I moved from to vote in an election that wouldn't mean anything to me because I had moved my residence to Wyoming. And I feel like when we're voting for what's forward, not what's behind us. And this 30 days makes it concerning to me because I could have potentially not been able to vote where I was planning to spend my time. And then I'm being asked to go to another place, and I might not have had the resources at the time to consider even going back to vote there. And in your 30s, you may not actually know all the laws, and you may not think about doing an absentee ballot. And then again, like those local elections weren't meaningful to me like they would be in the place where I'd moved back home. So I was more familiar with the community, and that's where I would have preferred to cast my vote. So I think this just concerns me that we are going to alienate a percentage of voters. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sorrow. Any questions? Thank you, Ms. Simmons.
Gail Simmons, Sheridan County, Civics 307, and why vote? I am just going to be neutral on this, but I do want to point out an inconsistency. In this particular case, when you look at 22-1-102A 39, under 39A, it establishes that for purposes of voter registration, it's basically by administrative rule of the Secretary of State. And yet, when you look at B under that same area, it is an exhaustive list of what identification is used for voting. And so the inconsistency for me is you can't vote unless you're registered. And so why do we have an administrative rule for getting registered, Mr. Chairman? But we have in law what you can use to vote. So it should be one or the other. And I would say for something as critical as our right to vote, that it ought to be statutory, not administrative rule. But in any case, it makes no sense that right next to each other, we've got, and we're talking about registration here with this residency, like why would that be administrative rule? And yet you turn around and you can, and by statute to vote. So with that, I stand for questions.
Okay, questions for Ms. Simmons. Go ahead, Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and I'm sorry it's later in the evening. Can you give that citation
Sure.
one more time, please?
It is 22-1-102, parentheses, small a, parentheses, I think they're called ruminants, 39, XXXIX, and then it is parentheses, capital A for rule of SOS for registration, and capital B for statutory listings of identification for voting.
Okay, one more time, 22-1,
102,
okay,
A, little a, and then ruminant 39,
39. Okay, just hold on.
and then capital A and capital B.
That's under the definition section.
That's correct, Mr. Chairman.
39, that's 29. Registry, is it the registry list?
So it just says, for purposes of voter registration, one of the identification documents or other proof of identity is specified by rule of the Secretary of State as adequate proof of the identity of a voter. That's under A. And then B is for purposes of in-person voter identification immediately before voting, and then it has a whole list.
I got it. I'm not as good on Roman numerals as I should be. Okay, I see your point. Any questions for Ms. Simmons at this point? Ms. Simmons, so the registration is a more rigorous process than the process of presenting identification at voting, right? Is that getting at your point?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that's exactly right. You can't vote unless you're registered. So that's, we've had people come up and talk about putting or different things around voting. It's like, wait a minute, even on the driver's license, when there was conversation about where do you put they're not a US citizen. Well, that's not going to be checked when they're voting, because that needs to be checked when they're registered.
I think we've talked about this before, everybody, that there are kind of two doors. Your first door is to get registered to vote. It's more complicated. The clerk has to prove citizenship. It's got a lot of requirements. And then when you come in to actually vote, what you're showing is that you are the person that is registered. So that's the second step in the process. And then Ms. Simmons' point, make it again.
So my point, Mr. Chairman, is that both gates that you have to go through are critical in order for us to exercise our franchise. And therefore, because it is so critical, I believe they both should be in statute and also be consistent. If they're not, you literally could go in and have an ID that you could use to register, and then you couldn't use it to vote. You know, they have to be consistent, but the registration should always be more stringent than, yes, I am the person who just went through all of that to get registered, right? So the registration, Mr. Chairman, is actually the most stringent. And so if anything, that should be the one that's in law.
And so how would you change the bill, page and line?
So I didn't bring it up with me, but where it says for the rule of the Secretary of State, I would insert the acceptable identification that's in that XXXIX.
Why don't you find that?
I'll do that.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee. My name is Micah Richardson. I'm with the Wyoming Women's Foundation. Our mission is economic self-sufficiency for women and opportunities for girls. And I am quickly, because you guys have had a very long day, I'm going to pick out the point that we have concerns about, and that is the documentation piece that has been noted before, specifically for elderly women in this case. So many women are not on their mortgages, they're not on their bank accounts. They may have a social security card, but their birth certificate will likely not have their name as is their married name. And so currently, you know, it asks for 2 forms of identification. And we would really love to see something that is perhaps a social security card and then an affidavit signed. Something to make this a little easier for our elderly population and specifically those elderly women so that we are not disenfranchising them. And that is it. I'll stand for any questions.
And then, Ms. Richards, where would you put that in the bill?
So that piece then would need to be on the Secretary of State side, from my understanding. And so that is something that we would like to see. Currently, it just says per the discretion of the Secretary of State. And so within whatever that list would be, we would love to see some sort of an exception for our elderly folks and specifically those women who may not have 2 forms of ID.
Okay, thank you very
Thank you.
much. Any questions? All right, thank you. Anybody else in the room wish to testify on the bill? Ms. Simmons is still looking, that's okay, we'll get back to her. Is there anybody online? Okay, let former Representative Roscoe in. Yeah,
Oh, Mr. Chairman,
hello,
can you hear me?
certainly can.
Okay. I'm just going to speak on when House Bill 173 comes up. I'm sorry, I was put in this line of order, so I have nothing to say on this bill.
Okay, well, don't go away. Anybody else online? Hold on, I got it right here. Looks like it. I'll give that back to you. Okay. Okay, so we have, we've completed all the testimony, but we have a little bit of housekeeping. The clerks have a concern that they came up. It's important, so we're going to hear from them. Why don't you guys come up?
Mr. Chairman and Committee, I'm Mary Langford, and I represent the county clerks of the state of Wyoming. And the small request that we have, we were looking through the bill, and on page 4,
Line 18.
line 18, where it says county clerk, that should be registry agent. And there is a definition for registry agent. That's anybody that registers voters. So that would be the county clerk, that would be municipal clerks, election judges, and those kinds of folks that needs to be included at that point, as opposed to just the county clerk. So tiny ask.
Okay, any questions for Ms. Langford? Thank you, Ms. Langford. Ms. Simmons, how you doing? You got it, can you help us out on what you were?
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
So on page 4, lines 4 through 7 is where it's inserted about having those identification or those requirements by the Secretary of State.
Yes.
And so I would just recommend taking the format that's in that 1-106, 102, and have it be the list of items rather than by rule of, so those 4, 5, 6, 7 gets pulled out and you insert in the list of the identifications.
So what you're saying is we would get rid of the rule and then we'd say, we repeat the language from Romanet 39 that you were talking about under 22.1.102. I think that's a little A 39.
Yes, so in current 156, line 4, it says proof of residence means, and then it says if you pull in XXXIX, then it just lists driver's license, tribal ID, Wyoming identification, valid U.S. passport. I expect that the Secretary of State has additional items that they would consider for this. But I think having a list that's in statute rather than administrative rule.
Okay. All right, and so it's in, this is acceptable identification now. So why couldn't we just say acceptable identification and proof of residency are these documents? Could we say that?
Mr. Chairman, I think that you could.
Okay, thank you.
You might, to give an out, give them some additional items. I mean, if you want to be a little bit more flexible, but I think it needs to be rooted in the statute, not exclusively to administrative rule.
Okay, your point's well made. Any questions from Ms. Simmons? Thank you. Mr. Secretary, of course.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You
and
bet.
Appreciate that. You know, the issue with this, Mr. Chairman, that the reason to root this in the rule, proof of residency, as you can see, one of the reasons why I wanted to hand that out is to show you all the documents we were allowing. And we really tried to be comprehensive here. That list is really with respect to voter ID, which, as you pointed out a few minutes ago, is another issue. What you're trying to stop with voter ID is voter impersonation. The residency thing is really about having a Wyoming address, and that's how we address the P.O. box issue. And we said that after taking public comment, and that we're going to address that by saying anything on a license that has a Wyoming address, including a P.O. box, is allowed for purposes of proving residency. So we did address that P.O. box issue, and that kind of, I think, gives a little bit of color on why that approach, we don't think that's the way to go on this bill, and why we need to be able to be nimble on these documents.
Any questions for the Secretary? Anything more? I get it. All right. Okay. I think we've completed the public testimony. So I think we did it exhaustively. We did a good job. So committee, you've heard the testimony. What is your pleasure? I've got a motion by Steinmetz and a second. Well, we don't even need seconds here. So discussion on the bill. Any proposed amendments? Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I don't want to belabor anything, but I do think a couple of good points were made. One item of concern is our aging population and, you know, disenfranchising in any way some of our older folks who have moved into whatever facility in that final chapter.
Like the Wyoming Senate.
Yeah, like the Senate, yeah, like that one. We have probably the fastest aging population, maybe first or
country?
second, I can't remember, but we're aging quickly in Wyoming, and I thought there was good testimony tonight on that front. Very good points made, but I wasn't able to capture exactly where we might be able to put something.
I'm also interested in kind of the same type of an amendment, but can I ask the clerk's question in the sense that if someone doesn't have all the proper documentation, you have this thing called a provisional ballot. Is that a possibility? But this is for proof of residency, so that it's not at the time of voting, so there's no connection there. So really, what we need is some kind of an attestation, which I know that some people don't like, but they'd have to volunteer that this is what they're doing, and it could be provisional in the sense that someone could challenge them on it. But this is in the registration and proof of residency part. It may be on election day. It may not be on election day. It may be in advance and have more time to really sort it out. But there ought to be a possibility there. What do you guys think?
You know, Mr. Chairman, I'm with you, and I think this is a group of folks that often have lived in Wyoming a long time. And, you know, my heart kind of goes out on that front. So I'm looking at the secretary on this. It just feels like there ought to be something we could do to help these folks who were described to us tonight.
You want to take a swing at it, Mr. Secretary? I know you don't like it, but what if we said we wanted it? How would you help us to get it?
Yep. Mr. Chairman, we worked a lot with the clerks on our rule on addressing, on thinking about that issue. And maybe I'll turn it over to Mr. Rubino with your indulgence to talk about the provisions we wrote, and you can point it out in the rule-making packet, which hopefully you still have from this morning.
Got it.
Mr. Rubino, with your indulgence, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Mr.
Thank you,
Rubino.
Mr. Chairman. Do you all still have them? I think I might have a couple more
I
too.
think we do.
Okay. If you go in the rules packet, it's the second to last page, 2-4 on the tracked-in version of the rules. The way these rules packets are, it's the statement of principal reasons, and then you have the summary of comments, and then you have the clean version. I don't want to point you to the clean version. The track change version, the strike and underscore copy is what we're looking at. On the second to last page, 2-4, this really deals with the section 6 was explicitly about proof of voter
Right.
residency. And under the original rules, it was if there was a challenge by an election official for residency and you did not have adequate identification that included residency, and the election judge determined for whatever reason that you should be challenged, which they currently have the permissive authority to do, then you look to these documents. One of the things that was added and actually expanded in Romanet 2 capital B is specifically to account for the aging populations that would be in a home or assisted living care facility. And we tossed around many different terms that we'll actually revisit when we come to ballot harvesting. But what we settled on after a lot of conversations with the clerks was a contractor intake document from a residential care facility, such as a nursing home, assisted living facility, adult family home, or community-based residential facility. It was really trying to encompass both the nursing home, but also sort of transitional living areas, really getting at a wide array that we have in Wyoming that would put something on their letterhead that someone is living there.
And Mr. Chairman, just
Go ahead,
put a little bit of
Mr.
a bow
Secretary.
on that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I know the next question is, well, how do we know that's going to be in the rule? I mean, first of all, I have a check, which is the governor. I mean, he would have to sign anything as we go back out to this process. And I really have no intent to touch that portion to make it any less addressing that concern. And so we did negotiate that a little bit, or at least talked about it with Clerk Irvin, the chairman of the Clerks Association. I remember that conversation distinctly, that meeting where we discussed that. And it was one of the things that we really discussed over the 5 to 6 meetings that we had with the clerks over that 2.5, 3-month period that we were drafting this. So that's kind of where we, as you'll see here, I mean, there's a lot of documents in this that if the credential, for example, the license doesn't have a Wyoming address, which includes a PO box, where do we go next? And that's what this list is partially addressing. So,
Yeah, I think you've got a good list here. I really do. Anybody else?
thank you.
So I would just, kind of one point. If we were talking about gun rights and we were talking about some kind of a restriction on your gun rights, we'd be kind of prickling right now. But now we're talking about people that have the right to vote, and we're making them jump through hoops, unlike with gun rights, where we kind of say that's absolute. And in my mind, the right to vote and the right to carry a firearm are equivalent constitutional rights, guaranteed by different amendments, but it's fundamental to our democracy. So the more restrictions you put on someone, it's no different than putting restrictions on their right to keep and bear arms. That's the way I look at it. So you have to, I feel like you have to have a way through this, but that's my personal opinion. I don't want to, that's why I'd kind of like to have another section on page 4, line 8, that would say that if a person does not have any required documents, they can sign an attestation that they are a bona fide resident of Wyoming. And we could even put this attestation is subject to verification by election officials and the Secretary of State.
And Mr. Chairman, I understand the intent where, with the amendment, and I just think that exception swallows up the rule, and really that's what we're doing already. And so already you sign an attestation that you meet the qualifications, that you are a qualified elector, which includes that you're a resident, that you're a citizen, but it's just an attestation. It's just, and what we're trying to get at here is really providing that proof. So from a policy perspective, I understand that, but I think that kind of swallows up what we're trying to do here. And that's my perspective.
We might just disagree on this, and we'll see where the committee goes, if that's
Thank
okay.
you.
I think
Yeah.
you've been very clear and very good about
Thank you.
what you're proposing. Before we do this, can we get the cleanup that the clerk suggested about the registry agent? Would somebody make that motion? Page 4, line 18.
Mr. Chairman, let's go to line 18 on page 4. And
Go ahead.
on line 17, first 2 words, strike county clerk and put registry agent. Registry agent.
I think it was county clerk or registry agent, isn't it? Or just registry agent?
Registry agent.
Okay, stand corrected, thank you.
Okay. This is on line 18, first 2
Yeah.
words, we're striking county clerk and inserting registry agent.
Okay. All those in favor of, with any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's carried. Okay. Back on the bill, Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This morning, we talked about adding proof of citizenship, and so I've distributed an amendment to all of you. It's a couple pages long, but that's basically what it does, is it inserts proof of citizenship and then what would be valid proof of citizenship on page 4 after line 7. And so that's pretty much what it does. You can look through it, and there are extra copies for the public that I made if anybody out there wants to see one.
Fabulous.
And so the good Secretary of State helped come up with the language, so if you have questions on it, they may be able to comment on that since we've kind of been busy all day.
It's great. Mr. Secretary, you're good with this amendment? Good, and people in the back, you seen the amendment? Okay. Just make sure it all reads. Basically, it says proof of United States citizenship means, for purpose of voter registration, any of the following: Wyoming driver's license or ID card, tribal ID card, valid driver's license or ID card issued by another state, U.S. passport, certificate of United States citizenship, certificate of naturalization, United States military draft record or a selective service registration acknowledgement card, a consular report of birth abroad issued by United States Department of State, an original certified copy of birth certificate of the United States. And then I think this is the oath here, the next part.
Right.
So, Senator Steinmetz has made that. Looks like people are okay with this one. Ready for the question? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's carried. Back on the bill.
So I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, in the amendment that we
Yes.
just got, we have page 4 after line 7,
Right?
but then is this just part of the amendment? Because then you have page 4.
The whole thing. Pages
whole
1 and 2,
amendment,
the whole shebang. I just went through the proof of citizenship, but there's similar things under the oath.
So it includes all the deletions.
Yeah,
Thank you.
every bit of the text. Good for that? Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator Lamb?
we should salute Mr. Rubino on that. I'm pretty sure he had his hands on
I
this.
bet he did. Thank you,
Kind
Mr.
of a legal
Rubino.
deal here.
Yeah.
You know, that one liner became a well-written document.
Well, look at it. Doc Stater throws it up there this morning, and then he disappears for the entire discussion. So
Yeah, I know, yeah.
we just passed your amendment, which
Because
turned
he-
out to be a lot
That's
more than
because
you thought.
he can't believe it got this big.
All right, back on the bill. Does anybody want to push forward the attestation? I'm willing to, and what I had proposed, somebody'd have to make it, but it would come in on page 4, line 8. It'd be another Romanet, and it'd say, if a person does not have any required documents, they would need to sign an attestation that they are, or swear an attestation that they are a bona fide resident of Wyoming, period. This attestation is subject to verification by election officials and the Secretary of State. Anybody want to offer it? Going once?
Mr. Chairman, I'll offer it just so we can
Okay,
have
about
that
it.
conversation, and I'm trying to think of the negative, and I respect where the secretary was. I don't think he prefers to go there, but I don't, it feels like that you could do this attestation at the clerk's office, right? You'd go to the clerk,
Election official, yeah.
election official, or even the Secretary of State's office. I bet they could do it for you. And why, so I'm trying to find out in my mind why that would be a bad thing. We have, we've got quite a few folks in Wyoming, up in Teton County and at our assisted facilities and elsewhere that are living in situations where they might have some trouble providing documents. But it feels like if we get a stamp from the clerk or from our Secretary of State, it should be all right. But I don't know.
Well, so
It's not a deal breaker for me, but it just feels like it would be.
let's hear from other people, but if they falsely swore, it'd be a false
Then you
swearing,
can go after them, right?
and that would have consequences. So you want to make the motion and we'll just see what we got? Or did you?
Yeah, I moved it.
Okay.
Yeah, so that we could have this conversation.
Does everybody understand it?
Discussion.
You can vote it up or down. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I'm an aye too. All those opposed? Got 2 noes and 3 ayes. Okay,
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, will you go through it slowly?
okay.
Is it part of the proof of residence or is
Well,
it,
it's another Romanet underneath,
okay?
and it would go in at line 8. And I don't know what the Romanet on line 4 is. It's LV,
Okay.
is L50, 55. I'm not sure what that is. but it would be the next Romanette. And it would say, if a person does not have any required documents, they shall sign, they may sign an attestation that they are a bona fide resident of Wyoming, period. This attestation is subject to verification by an election officer or the Secretary of State. I guess we'd say county election officer or the Secretary of State. And you can play with that language a little bit. It's late and we're kind of rough.
Okay, so I've got that they are a bona fide resident of Wyoming. And then what was next?
This attestation is subject to verification by county election officer or the Secretary of State.
I'm sorry, is subject to challenge
Verification.
or verification by,
The county election officer or the Secretary of State.
okay, thank you.
I mean, you can fudge that. It's not hard and fast language. All right, the only other thing on the bill that so far is Ms. Simmons' point about kind of codifying the rulemaking points. Anybody want to go there? Anybody want to go there? Searching for an amendment? Okay. I'm not getting an amendment. Is there anything else on the bill? Anything else on the bill? Let's call the roll on the bill.
This is a roll call vote for House Bill 156, proof of voter residency, registration with qualifications. Senator Boner. Senator Dockstetter. Senator Landon. Senator Steinmetz. Chairman Case.
Aye.
5 ayes.
Five ayes? Okay, and it's, let's see, who's actually on this bill? Steinmetz is on. Okay. I never say yes to those things. Okay. We're gonna be tight with you on this though, because it's kind of got some committee stamp on it too. We will. We're right behind you.
Okay, and Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, I must not be on tonight. Who moved the bill? I apologize.
Steinmetz did.
Okay, and you're going to take it on the floor?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
She's a co-sponsor. Okay, the next bill for our consideration is House Bill 173, engrossed independent candidate requirements. Got the sponsor of the bill here. Welcome, sorry about all the waiting today. Representative Harrelson.
Thank you very much, Chairman Case. Absolutely fine. Good job on working bills. I understand it takes some time. So before you today, you have House Bill 173, the independent candidate requirements, and kind of give you a high level and a walk through the bill. What this does is currently in statute, 70 days before a general election, an independent candidate can go for a petition and get placed on the general election ballot. What this would do is it would bring that back to the same time period that everyone else that's in a major or minor party would register for the election. They would put their name in the hat in that period and then get 14 days to collect after they put their name in the hat, 14 days to collect those petition names. That way they get placed on the general election, and this gives them the opportunity then to campaign in the same time period that all the rest of us campaign. The other issue is it doesn't push us deep into that general election season for them to worry about getting signs ordered and kind of walk through that entire process. So as we look at the bill, we're on page 1, line 11 and 12, we are amending 3 sections, 22-5301A, 22-5304, and 22-5307. And if you go Onto page 2, you see that this is actually just the petition, and so there's some corrections to the petition. You see that on page 2, line 16, 17, 18, we're adding in that language that an unaffiliated voter or an otherwise not registered in a major or minor political party. Because one of the things we've seen in the past is someone who will be in a major or minor party then becomes unaffiliated to run after that period of time. This just says if you're going to be unaffiliated, you're unaffiliated. If you choose to be in a party, you choose to be in a party. The next couple pages just simply are the rest of that petition. And then really, when we get into 22-5304 on page 5, we get to see kind of that meat of the bill. And so here you see where we are talking about statewide offices, countywide offices, and district offices, going from a 2% to a 3%. And I'll give you some numbers. On the statewide office, so this would be governor, top 5 elected, U.S. House, U.S. Senate, this would require around 8,100, well, as of 2024's numbers, 8,133 votes, or sorry, not votes, but petition signers is what you need to do to become independent on the state's wide level. For county-wide races, I just kind of crunched some numbers across the state. As I looked at it, it would be between 72 signatures up to as high as 1,300 signatures, depending on where you are running for and what you are running for. And then for district-wide, it would be 34 to about 200. So that would be that 2 to 5% that one you might look at and say that's pretty high. Well, at 34 signatures at 5%, it's not a terribly high number. It was low enough whenever I first started running this bill and looking at it. I come from a fairly large family. I've got 7 siblings, 5 of which live in the same community as I, and I figured out we could do a district race at the kitchen table. We could get enough signatures for that.
Well, that presumes your brothers and sisters are going to vote for you.
Well, yeah, that would,
That's a-
there may be days, to be completely honest with you. Moving on to page 6, it just continues to have that conversation and finishing out that language of the 2 to 5, and then it strikes out registered voters in the current district boundaries at the close of day on the day immediately preceding the primary election, and it just goes to the general election numbers. And so that clarifies that and cleans that up. Moving on, page 6, we do break then into 22-5307. And then we talk about in here kind of that change of the dates. And so an independent candidate for partisan public office shall give notice of the candidate's intention to be nominated by a petition to the Secretary of State and to the county clerk, depending on if they're statewide or if they are countywide, district-wide, that'd be who you would go and you would register with, not less than 81 days before the date of the primary election in the applicable general election year. That aligns with our current statute for the period of signing up for a primary as we would know it now. The candidate shall have not more than 14 additional days after giving notice to the candidate's intention to be nominated by petition to file a petition with the Secretary of State and with the county clerks. And then on page 7, its effective date is July 1st, 2025. So really, there's a couple things you're doing here. One, you are declaring you've got to not be part of a minor or major party, number 1. Number 2, we're changing those numbers from 2% to 3% or from 2% to 5%, depending on what area, and then changing those dates of when petition needs to be filed and signatures collected. And with that, I stand for any questions.
Thank you. Questions for Representative Harrelson? Senator Landon.
So Representative, good to see you.
Good seeing you too.
So let's just say that I'm contemplating just running as an independent.
Yep.
When do I have to disaffiliate from the Republican Party, for example? Is that a year in advance? Where I'm missing that, right?
Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chairman Case and Representative, or Senator, sorry, Senator Landon. So if it's a situation before that period opens, before that sign-up period opens, you can disaffiliate with your party, and then you could then, as that period opens, then you could register as an independent.
Could you do it 82 days?
I believe it would be, yeah.
So
I
it'd be-
believe, and someone behind me probably will correct me if I'm wrong.
Okay, so
I count on that, but I believe yes. So,
Because it's 81 days in the bill.
yep. So I believe that before that period opens, you could change at that point. In our current statute with the bill we passed with changing party affiliation, you could change from being a major party or a minor party to an unaffiliated, and then at that point you could register. Or you could sign up for being an unaffiliated, and then at that point you would turn around and start the process of getting your signatures for petition.
So, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Just a quick follow-up. So sometime in the spring, if you're contemplating doing that, I don't know why anyone would, but if they were, you could go in the spring and unaffiliate and then turn right around and run as an independent candidate.
That is correct.
Well, and actually, it could be later than that. I think if it's 82 days from the general election, correct?
Oh, that's right.
It's from the primary.
From the primary election,
Yep.
okay. All right, so it's,
Yeah, so, yeah, the spring.
Okay.
It'd be in May.
okay. Anybody else? Questions for the representative? Thank you, stay close. Who would like to address the committee on this bill? Mr. Secretary? I'm okay with that. Who would like to address the committee? Ms. Langford, welcome.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and committee. I'm Mary Langford, and I represent the county clerks. As you can see, this is a change in policy. We like to be involved in the administration of those kinds of changes in policy. We have really no position on this bill, but we would be able to administer it with the parameters that are laid out in the bill. We understand how that would work, and we could administer the bill, so.
Questions for
With
Ms.
that.
Langford? Questions, Ms. Langford, in terms of the days, tell me how the 81 days and then the 14 days works for your schedule. And I might try to push those numbers.
So the 81 days is going to be right at when you're filing for the primary. It matches that time. What happens now with an independent petition, they're filed after the primary election, before the general election. So there's about a 2-week period in there where you're filing for the general election, and that's when those petitions are due now. This would push that back to before the primary, so they would be filing at the same time that primary candidates would be filing also.
Okay, now help me out. How many days do you have to gather the signatures now, and does that change with this bill? Is it more or less? Would you help me with that?
It will, I think it should be about the same time, isn't it? Yeah, because it's about a 14-day period that you have to gather your signatures with the way it is right now. And that's being after the primary, before the general,
Okay,
okay? So it's that little 2 weeks right at the end of August, usually, so that you're ready to go for the general election. This would push all of that up to before the primary. So that's going to be middle of May,
okay.
okay?
Any questions, Ms. Langford? Senator Landon?
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So really, this is a big change, and the big change is that we've actually had people get beat in a primary election, and then they turn around and run. Have I got that wrong? Am I not
I think we
remembering that?
passed a bill about that.
They've tried to do that, Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon. We have a prohibition against that. You can't appear on the ballot again. The only way that you can run again is if you run as a write-in.
Gotcha.
The next
Thank you
time.
very much.
Senator Boner, were you, anybody? Okay. Thank you, Ms. Langford.
You're welcome.
Who's next? Ms. Simmons? Ms. DeSerrano? Come on up. You want to come up too? Just save time. Ms. Simmons, you go first.
Gail Simmons, Sheridan County, Civics 307 and Y Vote. I was watching a clip last night about a show about the East India Company. There's a reason that monopolistic practices are generally illegal. These allow an entity to unfairly dominate a market and restrict competition, Mr. Chairman. This bill appears to have the sole purpose of furthering the dominance of a single political party through exclusionary practices. There should be little difference in the political market than there is in the open market for goods and services. Furthering a political monopoly harms the electorate by suppressing competitive choices in general elections. The state already has limited competition due to the supermajority and closed primaries. In the 2024 general election for legislative seats, there were only 2 competitive races out of 15 for Senate districts and 15 competitive out of 63 for House districts. At the same time, the participation by registered voters for the general was at 91% compared to 53% in the primary. Overall, 148,000 more people voted in the general than the primary. The other monopolistic practice of this bill is erecting further barriers to entry for candidates on the November ballot. All of the additional restrictions on the candidate are clearly designed to prevent any individual not seeking nomination from the dominant political party to bypass the statutory monopoly provided by the partisan primary. Successfully meeting the current requirements for being placed on the November ballot is reflected in the candidate name followed by I for independent. Why would free market conservatives be so fearful of competition? It is not the place of the legislature, which serves all of Wyoming citizens, to place the benefits to a major political party above the rights of citizens to free and fair elections. I stand by the public comments I have been making on elections for the past 8 years. A successful democratic republic requires both participation and competition in elections. I am registered to be an affiliate with the Republican Party, not to have allegiance to the political party. Please vote no to this bill. And I stand for questions.
Your testimony is so unclear.
I was on a roll.
Committee questions for Ms. Simmons. So Ms. Simmons, I certainly get your point. And I see your point carried through in the increasing of the percentages. And I also see it in terms of the 81 days versus the 70 days. I don't see it much in terms of the 14 days to gather the signature. Is there other places that I'm missing?
Mr. Chairman, it's currently 14, and at the current percentages, that's not impossible. The likelihood is that people who would run for independent, who would be asking to be on the ballot in the general election as independent, are likely going to be legislative or below. So the numbers are not.
School board.
Well, except for they already are, right? Yeah, exactly. Ooh,
No, it's
I'm not going to touch that. But yeah, so the current ones, and this doesn't happen a lot. And I know that former legislator Roscoe is going to be speaking on this. But I think the importance is that whatever we can do to increase the competition is really critical. So
can you tell me though, what is, other than the raising of the percentage and the 81 days, is there another section that you think fulfills your idea of the monopoly? I don't disagree with you. I'm just trying to get it.
Got it. So increasing the day, so basically that plus the fact that they have to unaffiliate. So I affiliate because I believe in the principles of the Republican Party. Doesn't necessarily mean I want their nomination if I'm going up for an office. I may say, I don't want their nomination. I want to make it clear that I would serve everyone, and I'm not sure that an R behind my name would do that. So the fact that people have to unaffiliate.
I got you. I didn't get that before.
Yeah.
So that part, that's the third piece.
Yes.
Okay.
So the numbers, the time, and the unaffiliation. Basically, every piece that is changed in this, I believe, is a barrier to competition.
Gotcha. Any questions from the committee? Thank you. Ms. DeSaro.
By the way, just a quick,
Yep.
on the previous one, on the previous bill,
Yep.
the amendment that
We
you
were
put
done
in
with
was exactly what I was recommending.
Well, why don't you work that up and you can try to get somebody to offer it as a floor amendment?
No, the one that you voted in, that's what I was recommending.
Okay. Oh, then we did something without even knowing it? Yes. It's been a long day. Thank you, Ms. DeSaro.
Hello, my name is Jenny DeSaro with the Equality State Policy Center, a nonpartisan organization started by Wyomingites in service of Wyomingites for over 30 years, ensuring transparent government and fair elections. In 2024, in the 2024 election, there were 6 candidates for the state house seats who began the petition process to run as independents under the current law. Only 2 successfully completed, and 1 of them withdrew. Since 1970, William C. Holland from Johnson County, Melvin Brumnan from Niobrara County, and Jim Roscoe of House District 22 have been the only independent candidates to serve in the state house, none in the state senate. Please help me to understand what the problem is and what this bill is trying to accomplish. From my quick math, my colleagues' quick math, 8,560 ballots were cast in Laramie County for one Senate district. 5% of that is 428 signatures. To accomplish that in 14 days, it requires 30 signatures a day. I'm not completely familiar with that district and how many doors knocking and how far your drive is, but I do believe that would increase the burden than what we currently have for an independent candidate. The very few independent candidates. Independent candidates, from our perspective, this is unnecessary hurdles that were for individuals seeking to participate in our democratic process outside of the partisan box. The very nature of being an independent or unaffiliated candidate is that that candidate starts the race at a disadvantage by not having the backing of a party. This means no financial expenditures are made on their behalf, and no funds are given them directly to that candidate. No help in distributing materials or any of those campaign support that partisan candidates benefit from. So the independent candidate must fundraise, talent raise, support, and garner support from across partisan, from all parties, because there aren't enough that would, they just have a huge burden. It is really egregious that a registered R, D, C, or L might decide that they disagree. Is it really egregious that someone who is affiliated with a party might decide that they disagree with their party platform or their candidate backed by the party, and they decide to put their name in the hat in the general election? Because the independents can only run in the general. Wyomingites value their independent voice. This bill is government overreach and stifles our independent voice. Wyoming should be encouraging more participation from an array of viewpoints, not deterring independent voices and nonpartisan candidates. What is
You're
a little
getting close to the end,
competition?
aren't you, Mr. Sorrow?
What's that?
You're getting close to the end, aren't you?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, what is a little competition but an avenue for greater political discourse?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Questions for Mr. Sorrow? Any questions? Okay. Thank you. Secretary Gray. Mr. Rubino.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Chuck Gray, the Wyoming Secretary of State. To my left is Joe Rubino, our Counsel and Policy Director. This is certainly a policy choice, and it's a policy choice that I certainly support. And, addressing some of the testimony, the problem we're trying to address is to get a better balance on our independent process and get controls on some of the gamesmanship, in my opinion, and I think in many Wyomingites' opinion, that we have seen around some of this. And essentially, the bill changes three things related to independent candidates. One, that the oath required of an independent candidate seeking nomination by petition. Two, the threshold number of signature requirements. And three, the time for filing independent candidate petitions. First, the bill clarifies something we've received a lot of feedback on and that has been a real issue. And that's the clarification that to run as an independent, you should be unaffiliated rather than be affiliated with a political party. And, from a policy perspective, it really makes sense. And the way the statute's worded right now, it does not support that interpretation. And so we just really support that change. Second, the bill increases the threshold number of signatures required from 2% of the total numbers of votes cast for an office, as specified in 22-5-304, to 5% for legislative district races and 3% for state and countywide races, which is well in line with many other states. And I think it strikes the right balance. South Carolina, for example, is 5% for all races. And I will note, the House really tried to achieve a balance here. The House Appropriations Committee, originally this bill had it at 5% for all races. And they dropped the statewides and the countywides to 3%. But the legislative races with our low population and low numbers with 62 districts in the House, I mean, there have been situations where to qualify for the independent ballot, it's as low as 40, 50 signatures. And so to get that closer to something that is more in line with true intent of the district, I think that 5% really makes sense and is certainly in line with other states. And I think there's some genuine concern that in recent years this has become a way to circumvent the primary process. While we do have a sore loser law, which is currently being adjudicated in the courts, I've been sued, and I think Mr. Roscoe might go ahead and speak to that because I think he's
We'll hear from him.
one of the parties on it. That while we do have that sore loser law, there are still concerns that someone else can simply watch a race unfold and then, depending on the outcome of the primary, jump in, which I believe is not sound policy. And that gets to the third change in this bill, which is the bill as amended moves the petition deadline up to that of filing a notice of intent in line with the filing deadline for partisan office, 81 days prior to the primary election, with an additional 2 weeks to turn in petitions. Now, getting to that 2-week period, which was an amendment on the House side, on page 6, a little weird, this 14-day construction. But the one thing I think we need to button up on this addition from the House side on lines 13 to 23 is clarifying that the notice is provided to the appropriate filing office. It's not the Secretary of State and the county clerk. For statewide candidates, I think the way that would be worded, it would be all 23 county clerks, which just does not make sense. The statewide and the legislative candidates file with our office, so that notice would be with our office. With county candidates and local candidates, that would be with the county clerk. And so we'd ask to amend that to the appropriate filing office rather than the Secretary of State and the county clerk, and make that conforming across that paragraph. Did we get everything there? I think pretty specific. Yeah. Mr. Chairman, with your indulgence, maybe I'll turn it over to Mr. Rubino to put a bow on that suggestion.
Go right ahead. We're on page 6.
Yes.
In the lines 20 to 23.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Joe Rubino, the Policy Director in Council with the Secretary of State's Office. Appreciate you letting us go a little later. I was trying to track in some actual language that we might be able to have. So beginning on page 6, line 15, it really is the way that it is right now. The Secretary is absolutely right. It would imply that you have to file with both offices, where there are two different schemes for each one. That statute where petitions currently are required to be filed is Wyoming Statute 225306. Subsection A states that the petitions for nomination of independent candidates shall be filed in the office prescribed for nomination by primary election for such office. So again, it cross-references to the primary election application for nomination. And then B sets forth the fee.
Okay.
So what you would do, I believe, to clear this up is amend, beginning on page 6, line 15, delete, beginning with secretary of, and then on to line 16, delete state and to the county clerk,
So you,
and replace with the appropriate filing office for filing petitions for nomination as provided by Wyoming statute 22-5-306 subsection A. Yeah.
let's just do it again slower, okay?
So on
Okay.
page 6, beginning with line 15,
Yep,
delete secretary of,
yep.
going on to line 16, delete state and to the county clerk,
Uh-huh.
and replace with the appropriate filing office,
Slow down. Okay.
the
After all-
appropriate filing office for filing petitions for nomination
Mhm.
as provided by Wyoming statute WS
Right,
22-5-306A.
306, okay.
And then, Mr. Chairman, on page 6, line 22, the same issue, and I think you could do the exact same thing. You delete Secretary of State and with the county clerk and replace with that exact language.
Okay. Same language. All right, we'll take that up later, but I think we got it.
Yeah, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just wrapping
Ms.
this up.
Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We support this bill. We support all three of the reforms. You know, we're fine on constitutionality here. North Carolina, Utah, Texas, North Carolina, Utah have deadlines for independent candidates in March, and then there's states that have it in May. Ours is in, second week of June with this. So we're fine on constitutionality with the threshold. We're fine on constitutionality with the date. And I think this just gets us more balance on this independent process and gets control on some of the gamesmanship, in my opinion, that we've seen. So we support this bill, House Bill 173.
Okay, any questions for the Secretary? Senator Steinmetz?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, we had this happen in our county, and I don't know, it was 40 or 50 signatures, I think, for the independent to get on the, and I'm particularly concerned with the affiliation because then they ran as a conservative Republican on their literature. So I just want to make sure that this would clear that up, that they couldn't run as a conservative Republican because they'd be an unaffiliated or an independent or something like that.
Mr. Secretary?
Mr. Chairman, we believe it totally clears that up. The statute, the way it reads right now, it allows that practice, and it has been used. And we also think that is not appropriate from a policy perspective, but we got to clear it up in the statute books, and this does it. It's very clear. It's in the oath now that they are a registered independent. Getting to your question earlier, as long as they haven't entered the lockout period, they will have been, they'll be able to switch up to that moment. And so there might be a 2-week overlap depending on the year, but that's sort of the moment that'll be the deadline for them to switch. And if they're an independent, then they're an independent, and they can run as an unaffiliated. But if they're not, then they shouldn't be running as unaffiliated, in my opinion. And I think that there's a broad consensus on that it doesn't make sense the way it's been used. And like you said, then they put that on their literature. And what does that even mean? I mean, it's very confusing, and it's conflating two things that really either you're a registered unaffiliated, you're unaffiliated, or you're a registered Republican or Democrat. And they're very different things.
Senator Dockstader?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. What you're saying, though, they can file as an independent, but then everything else can be listed as a conservative Republican. Did I understand you right?
Mr. Secretary?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for that question. I could clarify. This sort of independent Republican thing it hasn't been on the ballot. It's sort of a thing that candidates, they switch, if they don't like who won the primary, they switch to independent. Then they file the number of signatures, which is very low. The current deadline allows them to do that. It's after the primary. Some years it's 1 week after the primary, some weeks it's 1 week after the primary, some years it's 2 weeks after the primary. And then they put in their literature that they're a quote unquote independent Republican. So they try to get two bites at the apple, right? They say they're a Republican, but then they say they're also an independent. And I think that was the spirit of Senator Steinmetz's question. And it's at the heart of what we're trying to get at in the bill is, you're either one or the other. You're running as an unaffiliated because you're not affiliated with the party, or you're running as a Republican or Democrat. And one of the highly disturbing things is a lot of those individuals will have voted in the primary. They vote in the Republican primary, then they switch a day or a few days later to unaffiliated, and then they get the signatures, and then they run as an unaffiliated. And it's been an issue.
Anybody? Thank you. Appreciate it. Who's next in the room to testify on this bill? Anybody in the room? Let's keep moving. Come on, let's fill out the chairs. We've been here since 7 a.m. Ms. Herman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Committee. Marguerite Herman for the League of Women Voters. And I just want to say briefly that I understand fully the frustration with the current, I call this, we have the sore loser, this is the sore winner law. So that we are going to, the winners are going to restrict competition on the general election ballot. It doesn't really serve any civic purpose that I can see, except that it does frustrate certain individuals who have testified this evening, that it doesn't, I'm not sure what is achieved by increasing the difficulty of getting on the general election ballot. And as Ms. Simmons mentioned, the competition actually encourages turnout, probably makes the winner of the primary a better candidate because there's more competition, called to account, answer questions. The change, the threshold change, making someone change their affiliation actually back in May because of the blackout period, it doesn't seem to achieve anything to benefit the voter, the election process, the choices before the voters during the general election. As frustrated and as distasteful as it is to some people, I think the test of whether the law should be changed or not is, do the suggested changes actually improve the process, improve the elections, improve the choices to the voter? And I would say the answer is no. Thank you.
Questions for Ms. Herman? Thank you, Ms. Herman. Anybody else in the room? Anybody online? Well, he said he did. Just get the other two and we'll keep working on him. Work with us, Jim. Can you let the other two people in too? Let's just do that and we'll take whoever comes up for it. Okay. Hello? And Mr. Craig, you're first. Welcome. We'd like to hear from you.
Hi, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Andy Craig. I'm a fellow at the Institute for Humane Studies at George Mason University, and I know it's late, so I'll be quick. I just wanted to flag some practical and legal problems with this bill. So HB 173 would make it harder to run as an independent candidate in partisan elections. But simply wanting fewer independent candidates or not liking the supposed gamesmanship motives of candidates or the messaging on their campaign literature are not constitutionally valid reasons. The courts have long held as a protected First Amendment right that ballot access restrictions are only justified if they're to prevent an overly crowded and confusing ballot. But that's not a problem in Wyoming by any measure. So some of the other witnesses touched on this, but I really want to emphasize it. In 2024, there was just one independent candidate for all of these statewide or legislative offices on the ballot in November who would have been affected by this bill. And that was in a race that would have otherwise been uncontested. The presidential race only had 3 candidates, and the U.S. House race had 4, but those were all from qualified political parties. There were no independents on the statewide ballot for anything. And going back decades from what I could find, there has not been any cycle where there's been more than a single-digit number of independent candidates for all of these partisan offices combined. Legislative races with 3 or more candidates in the general election are very rare. To have more than that is almost unheard of, and nobody thinks 3 candidates on the ballot is too confusing for voters to figure out. But that's what you would have to defend this in court on. So it's unlikely HB 173 would make much difference on the already small number of independent candidates, and it would also be in a much more difficult position to defend in court when you can't say, look, we have a real problem where we're having races flooded with a dozen joke candidates or something like that. In the absence of that, there's no justification for raising this barrier. And the same goes for the early filing deadline. One of the landmark Supreme Court cases in election law involved John Anderson's presidential campaign in 1980, where the court addressed squarely this point, recognizing that independents are only filing for the later general election and not the earlier primary, so applying the same deadlines to them is not justifiable. So bottom line, this would make Wyoming's ballot access law for independents one of the substantively toughest in the country in terms of the number of signatures needed, particularly in a statewide race, and the very short time allowed to gather them. It would add red tape and administrative costs and all the rigmarole. And at the end of the day, it might not make any difference at all to how many independent candidates end up on the ballot. So thank you for your time, and happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Questions for Mr. Craig? Mr. Craig, would you say your affiliation again?
I'm a fellow at the Institute for Humane Studies at George Mason University.
And by background, are you political scientist?
Political science is my background, and I've worked on election law issues for many years.
And you and I have crossed paths before, but I can't figure out where.
That's right. I was at the Rainey Center before. You came to our summit in DC. So yeah, I wish I could be there with you in person. I know Cheyenne is lovely this time of year.
Well, it's especially lovely today, I will say. But thank you very much, Mr. Craig. Thank you for your testimony, and I do appreciate it. And sorry I didn't recall directly where I'd met you before, but thank you. And sure we don't have anything from Mr. Craig? Thank you. All right, let's see who else is online. Well, thank God. Go ahead.
Hello, Mr. Chairman.
Hello.
Thank you very much. And Senators, this is Jim Roscoe. I just want to emphasize, I guess, what has already been said. The court case I'm not going to speak on. That'll be decided probably by the Wyoming Supreme Court. But what Mr. Craig just said, Ms. Herman said, Ms. Simmons said, Mr. Sario, it's all very valid. And it seems like even you, Mr. Chairman, said that it's a fundamental right for people who live in Wyoming to run for political office and to be unaffiliated. That's sort of goes with the name independence. I don't think that this bill should be passed at all. It just impinges on our freedom. I think people in Wyoming think for themselves, and this bill would certainly interfere with that. And I think having gone through the process, it's arduous, but it's complete, and I think it's just fine the way it is. I don't see that we need to waste any more taxpayers' money and run this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any questions for former Representative Roscoe? Any questions? Thank you, Jim. Good to see you. And there's one more, Ms. Sharp? Mr. Kemp?
Hi, can you hear me?
We can. We see some grass.
I don't know what's going on with Zoom. It's been running since very early this morning, watching everything going on. So I apologize for the camera issue.
It's okay.
But I'll make my statements very brief. I know it's been a long day for everyone. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for your opportunity to speak before you today. My name is Harrison Kemp. I'm here speaking on behalf of More Voter Choice, and I'm here to express our strong opposition to HB 173. As has been stated many times already, this bill threatens fair ballot access, voter choice, and the democratic integrity of your elections. Increasing the signatures needed to make the ballot by roughly 2,600, which is going from 2% to 3% for a statewide race, coupled with the drastic reduction of the petition signature gathering period. It just creates an insurmountable barrier that a lot of your independent candidates are not going to be able to do. That many more signatures in that short a time period, really, it just presents barriers that folks without the party apparatus cannot overcome. The Honorable Mr. Gray has already said, he said something to the effect of increasing the petition requirement will give you a better idea of the will of the electorate. But as anyone knows, that's not what the petition is for. That's what the election is for, is to give you a better idea of the will of the electorate. And the reality is that this restriction is disproportionately going to harm the legitimate independent candidates who are trying to make the ballot and represent Wyoming's interests. Wyoming already struggles with ballot access. More Voter Choice, our national organization, which tracks election law, currently rates Wyoming's ballot access as a C. And if this bill becomes law, that rating will likely drop to a D, placing your state among those that actively restrict voter choice rather than encouraging it. So the passage of this bill would send a very clear message that Wyoming values political gatekeeping over fair competition. And as has been said and noted multiple times, it's important to note that Wyoming's not suffering from ballot overcrowding. The argument that independent candidates clutter the ballot is not supported by reality. And rather than preventing ballot cluttering, this bill simply appears to make it more difficult for your potential competitors to join the race. And the goal of your electoral system should be to encourage more participation, not less. So this bill is going in the wrong way because Wyoming's voters deserve more options, not fewer. So in conclusion, restricting independent candidates in this way is not just an attack on those individuals, it's an attack on voter choice, free association, and the very foundations of our democratic system. So with that, I urge you to vote against HB 173. Thank you for your time and consideration, and I will be here for questions if you have any.
Thank you, Mr. Kemp. Any questions for Mr. Kemp? Any questions, Senator Landon? Anybody? Mr. Kemp, what are you in Wyoming? Or you represent someone? I'm not sure I understood that.
Yeah, so I'm with an organization called More Voter Choice. We're a national organization. I myself am based in Maine. And what our organization does is reach out to states like yours that are doing anything related to ballot access for minor parties or independent candidates. And we have a annual index that we've started putting out this last year, which ranks all 50 states on an A to F scale. And A is very accessible and almost makes it easy for independent and minor party candidates to make the ballot and be in elections, whereas an F is a state like Texas who makes it nearly impossible for anyone other than one of the two major parties to make the ballot.
Okay, Mr. Kemp, I think I agree with your testimony for the most part, but I believe the testimony that we received here, and the county clerks are here, was that the 14 days, they're not actually shortening that period. So it's moved, but it's not a shortening. I mean, I'm just trying to be factual here, and I'm getting nods from the clerks. So I think your other points are very valid. I'm just pointing that out. And any other questions for Mr. Kemp? Thank you very much, Mr. Kemp. Appreciate you doing that. Very informative. Okay, anything else?
Thank you, sir.
Anything else in here? Committee, you've heard testimony. What is your pleasure? I think I got it to Dockstader this time. You seem to be loudest. Any proposed amendments, discussion? There was the amendment from the Secretary of State. Does anybody want to take that one up? Senator Boner?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure if we have to repeat it exactly. Hopefully, everybody got it written down, but the idea being that it's basically a technical correction.
I think I actually have it if you.
Right, no, I'll read if you want to do it again, but
Yep.
page 6, line 15, strike the Secretary of State and the county clerk and insert the appropriate filing official for filing petitions for nomination as provided by Wyoming Statute 22-5-306A.
Got it.
And they have a similar language inserted, line 22, starting with the word with and deleting the remainder of that line as well as line 23 and inserting the same language.
Got it.
And hopefully
Everybody got it? Senator Landon?
I think,
Okay, let's do Landon first, then we'll go to Dockstader.
I believe that the language should be the appropriate filing office for filing petitions.
Sorry,
It must say
office.
official and.
That's
yeah,
what I meant.
okay.
Thank you.
Okay, it's obviously friendly.
Yeah.
Everybody got it. Further discussion? Further discussion? All those in favor of that amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that amendment's carried. Back on the bill. Anything on the bill? So I'll just go. I think this is kind of a bad idea. I think it's quite clear that this is about the general election. It's not about a primary election. We're trying to tie it to that. So anyway, I think increasing the percentage points are the wrong way to go. I mean, if there's anything, we hardly have any independent candidates in Wyoming. I don't know what we're trying to do here, but anybody want to vote, speak in favor? We can call for the question. Senator Boner.
Yeah, just having represented, with an area that has had these independent candidates pop up, there's two reasons to support the bill. First is practical. There's very little time in between the primary and when we start the general election, so it's really hard to mount a good campaign. Maybe, the reason why so many of these independent candidates have not been successful is because of that dynamic. I think if they had more time to really get themselves out there, basically have the same starting point as everybody else, maybe we would have more independent candidates here. So I'm not buying the argument that, it's necessarily bad for independents. I think it, gives them the same starting point as everybody else. And it does, and it guarantees that you have a truly independent candidate as well. That's the second point, is that, oftentimes it's just seen as sort of a way around the sore loser law. Maybe the exact person that lost primary isn't able to run, but maybe somebody they're related to or somebody they go and find later to run, and it's just a way around that sore loser law. So I think there's a couple reasons for supporting this legislation. It'll improve the quality of our independent candidates.
Okay, anybody else? Let's go ahead and call the roll.
This is a roll call vote for House Bill 173, engrossed, independent candidate requirements. Senator Boner.
Aye.
Senator Dockstader. Aye. Senator Landon.
Aye.
Senator Steinmetz.
Aye.
Chairman Case.
No.
4 ayes, 1 no.
All right, thank you very much. Let's see, we got Senator Boner, you're on the bill. You can do that. Okay, the next bill for our consideration, who's got their, it's ballot harvesting prohibition, House Bill 238 engrossed. And let's see, who's here for that one? Oh, okay. Did you help with it, Mr. Secretary? Could you get us started? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but it's been so late. Yeah, come on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go right ahead. You guys start us off.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And I'm Chuck Ray, the Wyoming Secretary of State. To my left is Joe Rubino, our Policy Director, and also our counsel. We're very supportive of House Bill 238. Walking through this, This makes clear that ballot harvesting is illegal in Wyoming. There's no provision in statute prohibiting ballot harvesting in the code, in Title 22. It appears nowhere in the code, and this is really a hole that we're trying to fix. So you'll see there on page 2, really that's the follow through. That's really where the meat of the bill is. No person shall deliver a ballot to the clerk unless the person is the qualified elector who is casting the ballot, the person is immediate family of the qualified elector, or the person is an employee of a residential care facility authorized to deliver a ballot under subsection C of this section. And we make clear that it doesn't apply to ballots mailed to the clerk. And in C, you'll see sort of the compromise that was hashed out in the House Appropriations Committee around residential care facilities, nursing home, assisted living facilities, adult family homes, and community-based residential facilities. That was not in the original bill. It was a compromise hashed out to address the situation of individuals in residential care facilities and like facilities. That was worked on with the county clerks and also our office. It was kind of interesting that the committee actually sort of suspended the bill so we could hash out a compromise to address that issue. And I think we got there. There is one thing I'd like to add there that I'll get on my testimony, but at the same time, yeah. And in D, you'll see this is something that the county clerks have asked us to clarify in bills like this. There's also in the Dropbox bill on what the procedure is. And if a county clerk, county canvassing board member, or other election official becomes aware of a violation in B or C, any ballot that is delivered in violation shall not be tabulated. And then it also, that sentence following lays out that the county clerk may provide notice to the qualified elector that the qualified elector's ballot has not been tabulated. The rest is sort of conforming language. It is a felony, which we add that in the felony statute, and it's effective July 1st, 2025. And we have the representative here now to present the bill.
Thank you. Well, we're glad you're here. Secretary Gray actually did go through your bill. I think he got through it, but we might have questions from the committee for either one of you. Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, hi, good to see you. Yeah, catch your breath for a second. I wonder what your reaction would be to adding in paragraph B that a person is employed by the qualified elector. I've got a couple of people like that in my neighborhood, and they literally have a right-hand person who takes care of them.
You mean like a caregiver?
A caregiver. And to me, it seemed like that would be fine by me, but you're the sponsor of the bill. I'm interested in what you think.
Representative Johnson.
Well, thank you, Chairman Case. I think, that is, you want somebody that's involved in that person and knows that person, and I think that would be fine. You can't think of all the different ways to produce this bill, but I think I would be, acceptable to that.
Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? So I'm not really sure I know what ballot harvesting is. So if someone shows up at the county clerk's office and has 10 ballots, all duly signed, like they'd been absentee request forms, and they bring them and they're duly signed and they're pedigreed with the signature on the back, is that ballot harvesting? I think it is.
Mr. Chairman, according to this bill, you would have to be either a family member or work for a assisted living facility, or perhaps a caretaker.
Okay.
Let me expound on that. I have three assisted living facilities in my district. And this what really kind of got me when I was campaigning. These ballots were all over you come in and talk to the people, and they're sitting there. I mean, I don't know why my mind goes, if I wasn't the right kind of guy, I could probably talk these people into voting for me. And that would be wrong. That would be ballot harvesting. And so I wanted to, have somebody there that's involved with that person hopefully it's a family member, son or a daughter, that would help them out, or a caregiver, or somebody that lives in that or helps in that assisted living facility. So they were everywhere. And I don't know how else to say that, but it was kind of frightening that, you could just go through door to door and, perhaps you could talk the people into filling out their ballot and let me take it down. And I know that was wrong, and it just presented itself, and I said, that's an opening that we need to close.
Okay, anybody else? So in that circumstance, I'm kind of having trouble with, they actually filled the ballot out. They, it's their ballot. How it got to the clerk's office, we're not disputing that it's fraudulent. We're just saying somehow they have to go through a procedure to get it. And this is the part I'm having a little trouble with. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Those ballots, they're mostly meant to be mailed. I think the problem that I see is that you're 1 or 2 days away from Election Day, and that ballot might not get there in time. And that would be where you'd want somebody to carry it down there and turn it over to the clerks. And that's my best case scenario for how this would work.
But if it's a legitimate ballot filled out by a legitimate voter, you care about how it gets there. I would care if 2 ballots showed up for that voter, or the voter later said, well, that wasn't my ballot, it was somebody forged that. But if it's legitimate, it kind of gets back to my thing about the right to vote is really, really precious, and if you restrict it somehow, but I better shut up. I think I've had a very late day, and Boner would cuss me out for talking too much. He'd be right. Senator Landon.
So what I want to make sure that I understand about the bill, because when I get home, I want to make sure my neighbors and friends know what we're doing here. So the way I read the bill, I cannot take 2 ballots from my neighbor if I'm headed down to the courthouse. I cannot bring those. And I'm going to ask the clerks a little bit later in paragraph D if they're going to confiscate those, or if I can take them back to my neighbor and say, I wasn't allowed to put these in the box for you. So any thoughts on that, Representative?
Representative.
Chairman Case and Senator Landon, I think that's the way the bill is written. You would have to be a family member or a caregiver or somebody that's represents that voter.
And then just to follow up, if it occurred, then the ballot wouldn't be counted, but would the person be allowed to submit another ballot?
I believe so. I think they could go down to the clerk and have it as a spoiled ballot, and they could vote there. I'm not sure how that would work.
We'll figure that out.
I think that would be a reasonable assumption.
Okay, thank you. Senator Steinmetz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Johnson, I guess the thing I'm trying to go through the process, so if you go to the nursing home, which unfortunately we've all had family members there, and I know what you mean, because when my grandma was, getting to her last days, she wasn't quite as with us as we would have hoped. And so are you saying that you're concerned that maybe somebody else that would take that ballot in would also fill it out, and then you would have a ballot that's harvested that, maybe doesn't reflect the person who had the ballot? Is that kind of what you're trying to prevent with this bill?
Go ahead, Representative.
Chairman and Senator, that's exactly what I'm trying to avoid, that somebody else would vote for that other person.
So right now, that would be illegal, I assume. I don't know.
Chairman.
Wouldn't it be illegal to exercise a ballot belonging to someone else?
I believe it would be.
Yeah. Anybody else? Well, thank you, guys. Let's hear from the clerks. Sure. You can go later. You kind of stepped into,
Yeah, I just
You put on a different hat for us.
just stay close. We'll get you. We'll hear from the clerks. Stay close. Or you got to go back up. It's okay. Well, I guarantee you, my committee will protect your
As
back.
far as you know, we're gonna take good care of you.
No, they will. I might not, but they will. Okay, Ms. Langford.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and committee. I'm Mary Langford, and I have the honor of representing the county clerks. And with me for this bill, I have the Honorable Mo Murphy, who's the Teton County Clerk. And the County Clerks Association really has no position on this. We'd be able to administer whatever your policy is that you decide. But we do want you to know that we have had no evidence of any ballot harvesting happening in the state of Wyoming. But there is concern about the nursing home situation. We did work with the Secretary of State's office at the request of House Appropriations is where the House bill landed. And we agree with the amendment that was presented by the Secretary of State's office and attached at that time. And with that, we'll stand for questions.
Okay, questions, Senator Landon.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll ask my question again. Under paragraph D, if I happen to forget and make the offer to take a couple of ballots on behalf of my next door neighbor, he's my eye doctor too, am I going to be able to take those ballots back up to him, to his house, so that he can bring them back down to you? Do you see where I'm going with this? In other words, I think that goes on relatively often, perhaps. Somebody making a run to the courthouse, hey, do you want me to take your ballot? Well, we better not be doing that anymore, right?
So, Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Langford.
Senator Landon, so under Section B, it says that no person shall deliver a ballot to the clerk unless the person is the qualified elector who is casting the ballot, the person is immediate family of the qualified elector, or the person is an employee of a residential care facility authorized to deliver a ballot under subsection B, C. So that's it.
Yeah, but keep going. If you look under D, it says any ballot that is delivered in violation of subsection B and C of this section shall not be tabulated. Will you tell that to Senator Landon when he brings the two ballots in and says, we can't count
We
this?
can't count these.
And he can take it back and his neighbor can bring it in? Is that legal?
Or, Mr. Chairman,
Go ahead.
do you confiscate it? I'm looking at one of our clerks.
Doesn't say confiscate, it says not tabulated, but Ms. Clerk Murphy.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon, if a ballot is dropped off to our office and we accept it, you would not have the ability to take it back to them and have them revote or it be spoiled.
But
unless you wrote that into the bill, but.
So I think though the situation was he shows up with two ballots, says, I'm Bill Landon, here's my ballot. And I brought Tom Jones's ballot in too, here it is. And you say, no, you can't bring Tom Jones's ballot in. That's against the law. What happens then?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Case, or Senator Langdon, I think that it's a good question. If let's say it's a deputy who takes it and who doesn't look or doesn't, because I mean, if we're handing them, we had 400 people going through our office every day during early voting. So when we were taking ballots, it was take them, put them in the box behind the counter. So if that happened, or if they accepted it and said, we'll take it, but if we accepted it, they wouldn't be able to vote it, or it would be rejected. So, and I mean, if there was, and maybe Ms. Langford has a different opinion, but I know in my office, it says no person shall deliver the ballot. If the ballot is delivered, and we know that it's not, we know it's your eye doctor, it would be accepted but rejected. I mean, we would take it, but it would be rejected.
So,
Senator
Mr. Chairman,
Landon, and then we're gonna
just
go to
take
Senator
this one
Bonner.
step further, because I think this is important. This is what the bill does. Now we establish another felony. And so the question then becomes, I just committed a felony, is what this says, right? So I would hope that maybe there's some
It's
discretion.
just 5 years and $10,000.
Yeah, $10,000 in 5 years, that's a way you can get rid of me. So just by bringing the neighbor's mail-in ballot down with me on his behalf, so what's the reaction of our clerks there? Do you feel like this bill requires you to turn me in to the sheriff?
Well, I certainly do, Senator Landon.
I'm beginning to worry about this bill. to
Ms.
be honest.
Langford, Ms. Murphy?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon, I think so.
And you guys have no position on this?
And we have no position.
Okay. Senator Bonner?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Along that line, so it seems like the word delivered is the key. You know, if you have that situation where somebody comes by and doesn't have the proper authorization, doesn't have the letter saying I'm this person's caregiver, you don't accept custody of the ballot. You say, well, actually, you can't do this, take it back. Does that count as delivered? And so, you know, and because if we read all of paragraph D, we got through half of it, we've got the last sentence, Mr. Chairman, where it says that if it is improperly delivered, the county clerk may, it's not a shall, it's may, provide notice to the elector that basically that does not count. So I imagine they have a chance to do it again at that point. So maybe that's the first question, but also, you know, how do you interpret the word delivered? That's the second question. You know, getting my colleague's scenario where, you know, somebody innocently, perhaps not knowingly, we're talking about a felony, I'm not a lawyer, but, you know, doesn't knowingly violate the statute, but does so on accident. What's your interpretation of the word delivered in that circumstance where you do have time to interact with the person, say, well, actually, you need a form, they don't have it. I mean, do you accept delivery or not? And so, yeah, those are the two questions.
Well, what if they put it in your Dropbox that you had in the last bill?
Yeah, then.
What do you think about that?
Then you're kind of hosed there, Mr. Chairman.
To you guys. What do you think?
Oh,
Any
Mr.
reaction?
Chairman, delivery is an issue. If they have, but the thing of it is they're supposed to have an affidavit with them. The person is supposed to have the affidavit with them when they deliver. And I would imagine, and I'm not sure, Senator Landon, if that would be the case, if you're being your friend's good guy friend, if you're going to have an affidavit from him. If he showed up without an affidavit, then that would kill the delivery. What do you think?
So the only place I see the affidavit is line 22, right? That's with respect to the employee of a residential care facility?
Yeah.
Okay, Senator Dockstader.
Yeah, a little more from the clerks, Mr. Chairman.
They're doing great so far.
Well, let's go to Teton County. It's 400 plus people maybe a day. Did I hear that? And somewhere somebody's going to hand you a ballot, or one of your staff won't have an affidavit, and that's your responsibility to turn them in for a felony. I'm a little concerned here. Your thoughts on that?
Clerk Murphy.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Dockstader, that is concerning. Also, I, as you know, clerks wear a lot of hats in our county, so I'm not in our election room. So that goes to the point of, I don't even, there might be some that do get dropped off that we don't catch if the affidavit's not with it. If they had to have an affidavit with it, I mean, I guess it would be more in rules or policy that we set in our office. If you don't have an affidavit, you don't take the ballot. I don't.
So let me try in here. How does that happen now? How do you receive ballots from, can a third-party person bring a ballot in for someone? And that,
Mr. Chairman, as the Secretary stated, there is nothing on ballot harvesting in statute now, so they can. We rarely see people bringing in ballots for anybody else than their family, unless it is with our senior living that I see.
Does anybody ever bring in their neighbor's ballot? Say, I brought this in for Mrs. Jones.
They don't tell us if they do, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Yeah.
So something is happening now. Has there ever been an assertion that a ballot was cast fraudulently? Maybe someone said, my neighbor brought my ballot in, but that wasn't my ballot. They filled it out. Has there been anything like that, even odd like that?
Mr. Chairman, not in Teton County, no.
Yeah, I've never heard of it anywhere in the state. But
And Mr. Chairman, we work
Go ahead.
closely with our senior living, assisted living care center, where my staff actually goes. We have a really good process of how we work with them and their families. So we go into the living center. We go in with absentee request forms because a lot of them can't leave.
Right.
And if they choose to fill one out, they do. And then we bring them their absentees. And it's two or three of my deputies that go in, my sworn deputies that go and then bring the absentee ballots back. So they actually hand them to us.
Okay, anybody else? Thank you, guys. Let's go to the public unless Secretary of State. Okay, let's do you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Chuck Gray, the Wyoming Secretary of State, and to my left is Joe Rubino, our Policy Director and our General Counsel. We really feel this bill is important, and I stand in support of it. Now, I really ask you to, I know there's some concerns out there. I think we can sort of build some amendments, and I think a lot of it can be done right now if the committee so chooses to address some of the concerns. But it's really important that we close this loophole in the statute, because the way it's worded right now, somebody could bring in 75 ballots and there's nothing in the statute to stop it. Now, I know the clerks have said they're going to ask questions, but the code is the code. And so we have to have some procedure where we're able to stop just massive amounts of ballots coming in that aren't tied to the electors. And the issue here is preserving that chain of custody with the elector and the qualified elector that is casting that ballot. And the fact that we don't have some sort of prohibition in state law is a real weakness in our statute. So I want to be clear that the statute offers clear guidance on this subject. I also want to note that in 22-1-102A, Romanet 37, this came up in committee in the House. It hasn't come up yet, actually, on this side. Immediate family is defined in the statute. Immediate family is spouse, parent, sibling, child, or other person living in the individual's household. So it's even an individual living in the household. That is defined in statute. And if you're immediate family, even in the early drafts of this bill, you're able to turn in that individual's ballot on their behalf. This bill also provides a mechanism where a ballot will not be tabulated if the county clerk or county canvassing board discovers that a ballot was improperly harvested and delivered in violation of the bill's requirements. And I really agree with Senator Boner that the key here is the delivered. Now, if we want to get, maybe lay out this iteration of what happens if someone makes a mistake and brings in somebody's ballot and it's identified, and my preference was that ballot would be spoiled and they just get another one. But if, whatever iteration on that, we can go ahead and work that out in committee. The other side would be to allow them to bring it back. I'd prefer for it to be spoiled, but I think that iteration we can work through in an amendment and still close the loophole by advancing this bill. Now, I will, getting to the mens rea element, I think, ultimately, all these prosecutorial decisions involve an examination of someone's heart and the intent, that mens rea analysis that prosecutors are doing all the time. And as Senator Nethercott always has said when I was a legislator, are very good at evaluating, and it's all over the statute, that mens rea analysis goes into that prosecutorial decision. But we certainly are fine with, on page 4, line 5, adding willfully before violating, and then that clarifies further that it has to be a willful violation, and that helps in that mens rea analysis and further clarifies that. Now, on subsection C, I would note that this was really achieving this balance for situations where someone is in a residential care facility, a nursing home, an assisted living facility, an adult family home, and a community-based residential facility, that those individuals will be able to fill out an affidavit, and we're not limiting the number they can do. A lot of states do that. And frankly, that was something that the clerks really wanted us to just have a clean thing, because in a lot of communities, it's one person that is in charge of this at each assisted living facility. And while I would like the cap, I think that where we're at is that the House committee chose to not have that in there. So we did really strike that balance and compromised on that evaluation, on the carve out, on situations of nursing homes and assisted living centers. But we're really trying to achieve the chain of custody on a ballot, and that's something that is a real weakness in our code that other states have really addressed. So we think it's important for us to move it forward, and you support the bill.
Thank you. Any questions for the Secretary? Mr. Secretary, where did you suggest adding the willful?
Page 4, line 5.
Because there's willful is already on page 3, line 23.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Chairman, I think that's a good point, that, we were just on the fly trying to say how we get the mens rea analysis further in there, but I think that is already there.
But I know Senator Landon, and he doesn't do anything without being willful. It's pretty much, if he's,
well.
Yeah, it's Will Young, not Will Full.
Anyway, okay, so willful's already in there.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Steinmetz.
Mr. Chairman, I wondered too about, just to be double careful, if on page 3, line 12, any ballot that is willfully delivered in violation of subsection B and C, we could maybe double insert it to make sure we're covering that.
Mr. Chairman, yes, I think that would further clarify that. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
As I remember, I don't have the statute in front of me, but we had created a misdemeanor level for some voter crimes a couple of years ago. Yeah, we did. And because the felony provision we thought would be just unenforceable. No prosecutor would ever do that. But anyway, that's another way to go on some of this too.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, certainly the penalty is a policy choice. We view this very serious, so we believe it should be there. It's got that willful element. This is when someone is intentionally bringing in and harvesting people's ballots, which has been an issue in certain jurisdictions, and closes that loophole. But certainly understand what you're saying, that that misdemeanor is all over Title 22. It's all over. I mean, false voting, for example, that has
That's where it was.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr.
if I might just add a little bit, that's one thing that if the committee so chooses or has an appetite for that, I'd be more than happy to take that back. But within Title 22, you have certain schemes where one violation is a misdemeanor, and then multiple violations or violations over a certain amount are a felony. And so that's the way some provisions of the code have tackled it.
Anybody else? Senator Landon?
So, Mr. Rubino, Mr. Secretary, any concern over somebody who works for an elector? That seems to me to be a pretty decent addition to the bill, in case you've got an employee who literally caregives for somebody.
I mean, I think a lot of people spend their whole end of their life trying to avoid going into a residential facility. They have people come in and help. And then home health comes or.
Sure, and Mr. Chairman, sorry to interrupt, but
No,
the
it's-
secretary and I
interrupted
live next door to a community where there's quite a few folks that have folks that come in and take care of them. So I think you know which subdivision neighborhood that is that I'm referring to, but there were a couple of ladies that I know of who have employees, and I just thought that might be a catch that we could throw that in there and be okay with that.
Well, thank you, Mr.
Mr. Secretary.
Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I think we could work with you on that amendment. I think if we could more narrowly tailor it than any employee, I mean, you know, not a business employee, but somebody who is caretaking in the residential facility that probably C does not quite cover, and then roll them into the affidavit, roll them into caregiver. I mean, I think what you could do is basically insert caregiver and then roll them into the affidavit. But we could help you draft that. Would be happy to. I get concerned on all these exceptions, but I understand the intent of it. And if that's the intent of the committee, would want to work with you on drafting that.
Well, let's hear from the public.
Thank you.
And we can come back to this. Mr. Laycock, and you guys have got 3 chairs. Let's fill them out. Mr. Laycock, keeping you from dinner.
Mr. Chairman, committee, you guys look just as good as you did 12 hours ago.
I don't think so.
Tom Laycock, AARP, Wyoming. Excuse me. So we first engaged on this bill a little bit when we realized that when it dropped, it didn't have that employee of residential care facility and nursing home provision. That's kind of a big deal to our people. As we see some of these voting restrictions kind of come forward a little bit, it seems to be our people that seem to be taking a lot of the brunt of it. And so that was a concern. We were very pleased that the House Appropriations Committee, the Secretary of State, the bill's sponsor, and the clerks were able to come together and put together this provision during a conversation I like to refer to as Stop the Steel Hips. Put this together. That really helps us a lot. Senator Landon, you're exactly, we're in the same place here, and I kind of wondered if that amendment might go well on page 2, line 9, right after ballot, comma, their caregiver, comma, because ballot harvesting bills on their own are not unique. Many states do have them, but every state has a little bit different understanding of who should be allowed to actually drop off ballots. I'd read through the entire allowable folks from Ohio, but we don't want to be here another 12 hours. But one thing that you do see that's very, very common is the word caregiver, or someone who assists with somebody who's dealing with a disability. And so what you're doing, what you're suggesting here is actually why I came this morning. I appreciate you being willing to consider that. So I'd be happy to stand for questions.
Okay, any questions, Senator Landon?
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and that's exactly where I had that. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Great minds. Anybody else? Thank you, Mr. Laycock. Let's go to Mr. Kemp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I reviewed Title 21, and we were working on the hand count bill and so forth, Title 20, it's late for me too, so the election bill. This was something that was missing, ballot harvesting. And ballot harvesting has actually become a strategy for political parties now to potentially sway votes on a national level. There was actually some indictments in Arizona in 2020 for folks who were using ballot harvesting. They caught them, prosecuted them. So this just seems like a no-nonsense law to add in here. It just makes it clear. I agree with Senator Landon's commentary about their caregiver. It makes sense, right? It's practical. One thing I will note is the drop box change that was on there. If somebody is ballot harvesting, they could very easily go right by the county clerk now and drop it in that box, which is why the drop box thing was part of getting rid of. So just something to think about. There's a reason for getting rid of drop boxes and ballot harvesting, because those two go hand in hand with one another. So I just think this is a good bill, that should be moved. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kemp. Any questions? Thank you, sir. Let's go to Ms. Simmons. Or I can't remember who was first. Were you first? Ms. Herman, let's go with you. Hate to leave you off.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm used to taking second chair to Ms. Simmons. That's been this session. Marguerite Herman here for the League of Women Voters. And the title, I think, harvesting on this is a little bit misleading because the term, and I looked it up, and it doesn't have any negative connotations necessarily, but I think it does actually, that it refers to nefarious gathering together and maybe even influencing the filling out of the ballots. And harvesting has that connotation. So I don't know if anyone, this is just about delivery, and at some point you may want to change the catch title or not. But it seems to me what this bill is intending to do is to lay out in statute, answer questions: who may carry a ballot, be authorized by the voter to carry it to the clerk. And so it's more like just putting a regular process: who can do it, the affidavit process. It's to help people know what they can do within the law, or helping out what they can do. I'm not a blood relative. Okay, how far removed from the person can I be? So it's really just about delivery, and harvesting is almost a misnomer. But I would say one thing that I think the league would support changing is, instead of making it just permissive, but to require the clerk, if someone makes a mistake and, it's I mow the grass for my neighbor, so I take the ballot in, oops, wrong. Is it a spoiled ballot? What is the status of that ballot? What is the obligation to notify the voter that you need to vote again? How do we rectify that? How do we cure that situation? Because otherwise that person has just lost the vote. And I think it would be good to specify that the notification is mandatory, and what kind of opportunity will be provided to the voter to fix the situation. Because through no fault, and maybe it was just a matter of people didn't know or didn't pay attention. There are whole legions of people who don't read the election code. So I would say that if you can offer some kind of a cure for that, we would appreciate that. And that's all.
Questions for Ms. Herman? Any questions? Thank you, Ms. Herman. Ms. Simmons.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have any comments on this, but I do have a table of all the offenses and the citations, the offense, and what the penalties are that I just wanted to provide to you. I only have one copy.
Okay, yeah, and that's under the election code?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, yeah, why don't you give it to me, and then I'm not sure what we're gonna do with it. Maybe we can make it available. Can you email that to us so we can put it up on the website for other people? That'd be great. Thank you. Okay, we can, yeah, there are a lot of them. All right, who else would like to testify on this bill? Anybody else? Is there anybody online? Okay. Committee, you've heard the testimony. What is your pleasure? I think I had a motion by Landon. Discussion amendments? Senator Landon?
I would propose the amendment we have been talking about, Mr. Chairman. Page 2, line 9, after ballot comma, I would move to amend, the person is a caregiver of the qualified elector, comma. And that would be inserted after the comma and before the word the on line 9. Again, the person is a caregiver of the qualified elector.
Okay, I'm not sure it reads quite right, because the next sentence has two situations connected by an or. Person is immediate family, or person is employee of the residential care. So, but I think we might need.
It's a list, I think, Mr.
Yeah,
Chairman.
it's a
And
list.
I think that's the intention anyway, is that you would say that,
Yeah, I'm getting groggy, but So.
Person's a caregiver, the person's an
I mean,
immediate
a family
member,
or the
is an
person is employee of the
the
residential care facility. That's the intention.
Mhm.
Lily, can you help us sort that out? You don't have to do it right now. But it would be a list with each one standing equal either, and it would be an or. I suppose in some cases it could be an and, but at least the or. Okay, further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, any opposed? I'd make that list bigger. I think it could be the guy that mows your lawn. But anyway, okay, we'll go with that. Anything else?
Mr. Chairman, just a quick conversation on page 3, line 16.
Yep.
The county clerk may provide notice to the qualified elector. If they're gonna take a ballot and disqualify it, it just feels like the clerk shall provide notice to that
Is that okay?
voter.
Okay, go ahead. So the motion,
So that's my motion on line 16.
May to shall.
Take the may out of there and just say that the clerk shall
okay,
let somebody know that their ballot isn't any good.
yep. So they obviously have the ballot in hand, so okay. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's carried. Does anyone want to mess around with willfully? Senator Steinmetz, you'd flirted with that on line 12, page 3.
We can talk about it for the whole, it's getting late.
Your microphone, ma'am. It is getting late.
Mr. Chairman, see how late it's getting? I forgot to turn on my microphone. Why don't we leave it in this shape for now, and if we decide to do that for committee of the whole, we could.
Okay. Anybody else have any motions? Any other motions on the bill? Okay. Just preliminary thing, I mean, can do it now or later, but I don't think I can support this bill. I just don't see the problem we're really trying to fix. And with the Dropbox bill that we fixed, and we left drop boxes on the table, and that's where they're gonna go. But if someone actually filled the ballot out, it's a legitimate ballot, I'm not concerned about that. So, and I don't have any evidence that we have a problem. So that's where I'm going on this, but anybody else want to say anything? Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, I'm gonna support it tonight. I've got some concerns right along with you. I just don't know that we're fixing much of our problem here. It is, I mean, it's a headline maker because ballot harvesting, it's a headline, and it makes it sound like we're doing something. I'm just not sure it's helpful to our voters, and so, but tonight I'm gonna support it.
Okay, fair enough. I think the testimony we had, we didn't have a single incidence wherever any fraud was committed because of this. I just want to make note of that. Okay, well, let's call the roll.
This is a roll call vote on House Bill 238, ballot harvesting prohibition. Senator Boner.
Aye.
Senator Dockstetter.
Aye.
Senator Landon.
Aye.
Senator Steinmetz.
Aye.
Chairman Case.
No. So,
4 ayes and 1 no,
and we've got,
and amendments.
who's going to carry that? We've got, you're on this one too. Steinmetz. She's everywhere.
I may have somebody else do it before, but I will put it down.
Well, it doesn't have to be you, but
Yeah.
somebody that heard the testimony would be the best. Okay, so, ladies and gentlemen, let's, looking ahead to Friday, we have a whole bunch of bills, but we're gonna hear that electric utility bill on the wildfire mitigation. I would think we would probably start at 7:30. We won't have an adjournment meeting on Friday, I promise you. So we'll just go to when we start, and we'll pile as many in there as we can. I really do appreciate your work, and thanks for being so kind. Take care, welcome everybody, have a nice evening.